Our gospel today comes from the 9th chapter of Mark. It's a powerful story. It's a story that I think is outside of our everyday experience. So I would love for you, if you're comfortable with this, to close your eyes and turn on your imaginations and see if you can picture yourself somewhere in this story. If closing your eyes is uncomfortable for you, that's okay too. But listen and imagine what this would be like. From the Message. Jesus took Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain. Then his appearance changed from the inside out right before their eyes. His clothes shimmered, glistening white, whiter than any bleach could make them. Elijah, along with Moses, came into view, deep in conversation with Jesus. Peter interrupted, "Rabbi, this is a great moment. Let's build 3 memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He blurted this out without thinking, stunned as they all were by what they were seeing. Just then, a light, radiant cloud enveloped them, and from deep in the cloud a voice, This is my son, marked by my love. Listen to him." The next minute, the disciples were looking around, rubbing their eyes, seeing nothing but Jesus. Only Jesus. So what did you see? What did you feel? Was this story familiar to you? Had you heard it before? Did you notice something different? What stuck with me when I read this story this week was the disciples' fear. They were terrified. And they didn't know what to do or where to turn or what to say. And I know that feeling. Maybe you do too. I think there's all been a time in our life when we have been afraid. I think we're afraid more often than we like to admit. The screen says, it's a quote from Georgia O'Keeffe, "I've been absolutely terrified every second of my life, and I've never let it keep me from doing a single thing that I wanted to do." I don't know that we all respond like Georgia O'Keeffe, but I do know that we have a whole lot in common, and one of those things that we have in common as human beings is fear. Glennon Doyle Melton says this, "We're all afraid, and that's okay. We can show up and take care of each other in the midst of all of the fear." That's the good stuff. And you know what the antidote to fear is? It's not self-improvement. It's love. When we love messy people well, we start to love our messy selves more. And all that love makes us brave. And eventually, Love beats fear. Love wins. Love wins, friends. When Jesus was transfigured on that mountain and God spoke words through that cloud in the midst of the fear of the disciples, God called out love. God called Jesus his beloved. I think when our frail humanness is faced with fear, one of the first things we try and do is put some kind of meaning or order around the fear or the experiences that we are having. We try and come up with some kind of formula. Well, if A happens, and B happens, and C happens, if I try and make sense of all of these things and put them all together, all of a sudden I come up with X. And it doesn't necessarily make sense, right? Have you ever listened to someone tell those kind of stories where they explain these set of circumstances and they come up with this crazy plan that God is somehow doing in their lives? Anybody experienced that before? I'm regularly amazed at our human capacity to draw meaning from almost any circumstance. And I think what drives that in us is a need for stability. That if we put some kind of order to this, that it will all make sense and will be okay. If we don't have order, sometimes I think we fall into the trap of thinking that everything is meaningless or chaotic or even hostile. And so we are born to be these meaning makers, trying to make meaning and seeking to lay some imaginative order to all of these various events and circumstances in our lives. Now, sometimes this is helpful, right? When we're looking at our own lives and we're trying to figure out where we're going, what's going on, this meaning making can be a positive thing. It invites us to grasp new possibilities and open ourselves up to new things, new experiences. And even though transitions can be difficult, if there's meaning, it moves us forward on that journey. And that's great. But sometimes our need for meaning and order can put us in some pretty unhelpful places. Sometimes our need to explain things and put reason around things can be hurtful, particularly when we're imposing our meaning on other people's lives and circumstances. I know I have slipped up and said things that I don't mean when I'm trying to comfort people who are grieving, searching for the right words. Maybe you have too. Sometimes I hear people say things like, "Oh, your child died because God just needed another angel." Or, "This must be God's plan." And I don't know that that's true. And I don't know that that's helpful. And that kind of meaning making, when we're importing our own vision on other people's reality, can sometimes make someone who's already suffering pay for our need for meaning and order and structure, even though it's well-meaning and we're just struggling for the words. I get it. I've been there myself. But there is something inside of us as humans that needs to put reasons around things, right? I think the disciples were at that same place, standing on the mountain, wondering what to do next and what to say and what to make of all of this going on around them. So there Peter is, not really knowing what's going on, but he sees Elijah and Moses. And from his good Jewish upbringing, he knows that when Elijah and Moses show up, that means it's the day of the Lord. Right? The end of times is here. And in his good Jewish upbringing, he knows that they celebrate that when they celebrate the festival of booths. So the first thing that Peter thinks of is, I know the answer. We are going to make booths, and we're going to stay here forever, and we're going to celebrate like the festival says we should. I'm going to import my meaning making on this situation and make it all make sense. And God reaches in and envelops them in a cloud of light and says, don't miss the mystery for your need for order. Don't miss the love and this magical moment for your need for stability. It's amazing that God can break into that with God's love and God's light and God's hope. So what do you do in a moment like this? When faced with change, faced with fear. Peter didn't quite know what to do. But God still came in that moment and met Peter where he was. Just like God comes to us over and over again, inviting us into this beautiful mystery of love that God has for us. And if you've experienced love, you know that love doesn't always make sense. Love doesn't always follow a particular order of the way things should be. Love shows up and interrupts, and it's messy and beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily fit in with our plan. God shows up in the midst and said, "This is my son. This is my love. Listen." God invites us to experience the wonder and mystery of Jesus. And I suspect as much as we say we want to experience God and be in relationship with God, we aren't necessarily ready for a transformational experience, a transfiguration of our own. We would rather stay just as we are, comfortable in our orderly, ordinary kind of lives. Because we know when God shows up, things change. What we have, who we are, may not be everything we want, but at least we're used to it, right? It's okay. And when God shows up in our lives, the transformations that take place, although they may not be as majestic as the one on the mountaintop, those transformations happen in ordinary ways. Our hopes, our encounters, even our tragedies. in our everyday life, where God comes and shows up and unsettles us and disrupts the ordinary. Disrupts our need for stability and calls us into something deeper and greater. Because God always goes before us and behind us, beside us, and with us all the way. Maybe, just maybe, we don't need to know the plan. We don't need to fit it into our order of how things are supposed to be. Maybe, just maybe, we can trust the love of God. As they're coming down the mountain, Jesus mentions his suffering and death. And I have to imagine for the disciples who'd just been terrified that was not an easy thing for them to hear, and probably threw them into fear yet again. Suffering and death and fear are something that we have in common. But Jesus did not die because his suffering as such could purge the world of sin and evil and death and suffering. He died because the powers of evil sought to destroy his witness to love and justice and truth. Jesus' suffering and passion revealed not only the evilness that is evil, but it revealed the transforming power of divine love. A powerful, assertive love that does not dominate and defeat evil so much as challenge, expose, and seek to transform it. Such love ultimately carries the day, friends. It alone is truly redemptive and saving. God's love. That love was what was revealed on that mountaintop. That love is what transforms us and shines brightly even to this day. That love is Jesus. And Jesus is knowable. Jesus is someone who comes to have a relationship with you and with me, to walk with us through the very best and the very worst of what life has to offer. God is love. Amen.